Hello everyone, and welcome to the Innovate for Climate Facebook series. We are broadcasting live from our digital media zone here in Singapore. We have gathered here today together with global leaders from business, finance, technology, and government officials who have come together to discuss the future of climate finance and solutions to fight climate change. Before we begin, please follow our conversation using the hashtag #InnovateForClimate. I am Irina Likhachova with the International Finance Corporation, and I'm here today with Steffen Endler, who is a Senior Vice President from Siemens. At Siemens, he is heading the Digitalization Hub, and he heads the Internet of Things services for the ASEAN region. Steffen, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
First question, Siemens have been working quite a bit with cities across Asia and globally across a number of sectors. Could you give us some good examples of collaboration between cities and the private sector in trying to achieve their climate objectives?
Well, a lot of cities around the world have set their goals, how they want to reduce their carbon footprint. But setting goals is one thing, making it work and coming up with viable strategies is another thing, and this is, I think, where the real work starts. And one good way to figure out what for each city is a viable strategy is to do a so-called resource profiling. And some of cities like London, Yekaterinburg, also Singapore, have started such exercises already a decade ago. And we worked with, in the meantime, more than 50 cities around the world. Helping them to structure, to evaluate what are actually meaningful measures to get there. So in the meantime, this has become a tool, a city performance tool. And what we do there is we look at the installed infrastructure, what kind of technology it is, what kind of energy is being consumed, what are the growth projections. And then based on this one, we evaluate technology levers to assess how impactful is to do it that way or that way or that way. Because in principle, you can do 100, 200 individual measures. The question is, what should you do? Because you have only limited amount of money, financing, public will. So to chart out such a strategy, doing such studies is a very, very impactful way of getting started.
Well, thank you very much for these examples. Throughout the conference here during the week, we have been hearing the important role the private sector could play in helping cities deliver on a range of projects at the municipal level. So you gave us some examples, but what do you think still needs to be done and should be done in order for cities to be able to attract private capital to help them implement projects at the municipal level?
I think, first of all, there need to be projects. Those projects needs to be transparent, and they need to be happen, and they need to be very clearly communicated of how is this being brought to the market. Different ways of public procurement. Some are more meaningful under certain circumstances for the private sectors than others. So clarity and transparency on this is one side. The other side is to actually really make projects happen, because if large infrastructure projects getting delayed and delayed and delayed, eventually that also discourages the public sector. But to really drive innovation, I think the most impactful thing that cities can do is regulation. Because in many cases, regulation is not very meant to really encourage innovation. So having a regulatory system is one thing, but they change. And it's even more important to have regulators who are willing to change and to work with the private sector to make sure that innovative solutions can be implemented. I'll give you one example. A couple of years ago in Brooklyn, after New York faced a massive blackout, there were a bunch of neighbors who thought, well, we all have solar panels on the rooftops. Maybe we somehow bind them up and build a kind of microgrid. And when we are not at home, but the sun shines, we want to sell that energy back to the grid. Now, when they started, that idea was under regulatory circumstances actually not possible. So they started to really work with the regulators, and those regulators were very willing to find ways to make this happen. And eventually Siemens stepped into this project as well. With our Next 47 investment arm, we financed some of that, because that is a very interesting technology where a bunch of people, neighbors, you and me, We don't have a clearinghouse, but we still want to somehow trade energy among each other. So for that, you need a marketplace, you need technologies to enable this, to certify that, and you need to have a grid control technology to make this happen. And that's one good example how if all parties come together with the intention to really make it work, you will get it work.
Well, this has definitely been one of the themes throughout several days, that the private sector really needs predictable and stable regulatory environment, business enabling environment to function. But you mentioned technology, which is another very important aspect of what we're trying to do. And within your company, you actually look at some of these technological breakthroughs that exist. So are there any particular technologies that cities across emerging markets are particularly embracing to help them develop in a climate smart way? And what do you foresee as a potential other technological breakthrough that would really accelerate the urban development in a climate friendly way?
I think what we see in the developing world is that there's still a lot of infrastructure to be built, which is good because cities, investors have the possibility to really leapfrog. They don't have to deal with old legacy systems, so they can, from the very onset, think of what are the most efficient technologies, the most innovative concepts to be built for a greenfield new investment. And when we talk about reducing carbon footprint, it's all about energy. How can we have a lower carbon intensive energy mix? And how can we eventually also consume less energy? And this topic of decentralized energy systems, where people generate energy out of waste, out of solar, whatever other means they have within the city, this is an area which we see specifically in developing countries picking up, because they don't even have the grid infrastructure built yet anyway. So that's a very interesting thing, because that brings the ownership to this topic really back into the city. Another example is when we talk about transport. So whatever cities can do to have people not stepping into their own private cars is very, very impactful for the climate. So mapping out transport system, investing in mass transportation, I think there's no way around it. And it doesn't matter what kind of specific technology you have in this means, you need to go that way. And I think there's a lot of viable technologies out there today which can be used, so no one have to wait for the horizon and the white knight. We have a lot of tools at our hands, and we should make them use of them.
Thank you very much, Steffen. Thank you very much for your time and your insights. And thank you to our audience for joining us. Please continue to follow the conversation using hashtag #InnovateForClimate. We're live from Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you.